Welcome back to Bitcoin Treasuries. I'm Tim Kotzman here with British HODL. British, pleasure to have you with us today.
Always a pleasure to join you. Thank you. You are, as I say, the originator of the suit and the orange tie. It's always a pleasure.
I will take it. How has your perspective on Bitcoin evolved over the years? Was there a perspective you had at first and it's much different now, or it's aged, or is it basically the exact same?
No, originally I thought Bitcoin was an utter scam. So it's definitely evolved from that. Um, Coming from a gold background, coming from real estate, coming from equities, you look at Bitcoin, you start talking about Bitcoin to your friends in TradFi, and everyone's opinion is it's a scam. It doesn't work. It's not real. I can't touch it. It doesn't generate earnings, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So your mindset is this is a scam. That changed for me in 2020, as you know, and since then the light bulb went on, and I realized that one of the lessons that I learned in 2007, 2008 was that all investing is a scam.
Mm.
There is no finding value. Because when you've got an unlimited money printer, the only thing that matters is how far on the risk curve are you willing to go? And therefore, that will determine how much of that capital you get. That's it. Everything else went out the window. All of the intelligent investing went out the window. I speak to how many people, I speak to so many people that telling me, I generated this return, I generated that return. And I remember distinctly in 2021 speaking to a guy, ultra high net worth, said, my Morgan Stanley guys generated me 35% in the last year. And I said, congratulations, you've basically stood still, because that's how many dollars were printed in the last year. And the light bulb went on for him at that point too, because 35% return a year is unbelievable
Mm-hmm.
in traditional numbers. After 2020, the game changed. So at this point, Bitcoin is the first, from a traditional asset point of view, it is the furthest asset on the risk curve. And as it matures, it will come further and further in on the risk curve. And therefore, you want to be, allocated along that risk curve to the point where you feel comfortable, you feel safe, but you're also protecting the overall value that you've accumulated. So my opinion on Bitcoin, has changed radically from when I thought it was a scam, but it's only strengthened since 2020, since the light bulb went on for me.
So if 35% is standing still, how do you think through what the real cost of capital is, for you?
To me, my hurdle rate is Bitcoin, right? So the absolute minimum return I must be able to generate if I'm considering any investment is Bitcoin's return. That makes everything extremely hard, right?
Mm.
Anything you're put anything else. Like I've had so many ideas to do passion businesses and all these other things in the last few years, and all of them get swept under the rug because there's just no way that I could generate the return that Bitcoin could generate. So I find myself sitting on my hands a lot of the time, just waiting for Bitcoin to do its thing. At some point, that'll change, right? At some point, Bitcoin's CAGR will come down enough where it is now, I wouldn't say worth it, but interesting to consider doing other things. And I'm waiting for that at my point in life.
Can you talk a little bit about being a professional waiter? Because I remember you talking about it maybe a few years ago, but I'm sure there's listeners out there that haven't heard that from you. And I just remember you putting it in a way that obviously really resonated because I'm remembering it right now.
Yeah, every person's job in life should be to earn money and then be a professional waiter, because the capital that you're putting that currency into is growing for you. You shouldn't need to be an active investor in order to keep the capital that you've worked so hard to earn. This is the fiat scam that's been generated for the last 230 years, which Bitcoin is now repricing. So, from an average person's perspective, their job is to wait. Your job should be to earn money in the form of currency, put it into a form of money, which is Bitcoin, real estate, et cetera, and then just wait. until opportunities arise. Active trading is not supposed to be for most people. And we've seen markets evolve to the point where indexes have taken over active trading, right? And indexes are outperforming active traders. You've got hedge funds that can't outperform the S&P 500. So from that perspective, trading is, trading is a fool's game. There are very, very minute and specific opportunities in trading and specific people that can take advantage of them. I think Paul Tudor Jones is one of those people that can take advantage of those opportunities. But I think the average person watching this trying to outtrade the compound annual growth rate of Bitcoin is going to find themselves, on the wrong side of the coin. Within a few years, they might be able to do it for 1 year, but try and pull that off for 15 years, and then we'll see where we're at the end of that. So
How,
be a
yeah,
professional waiter.
be a professional waiter. How would you go about explaining Bitcoin's role as sound money to, shall we call them skeptics who are just kind of deeply entrenched in the traditional TradFi system?
It's quite funny because my role in this, my own perception of my role in this space has kind of evolved, in the sense that at this moment in time, there is nothing to explain anymore. It is becoming it is an institutionalized asset at this point. So if you're sitting there going, "Oh, I'm a skeptic, it's not going to work," you think BlackRock is in something that's not going to work? You think BlackRock is in something that they can't push enough capital around to make work? That's egotistical. That is arrogant, to be able to think that. That's the one powerful thing about Bitcoin, is that eventually it humbles you. No matter how much of an arrogant prick you are, it humbles you to realizing that you cannot outpace it. It's one of the things I had to realize, right? I had to realize in 2020 that there was no value in me pursuing an aggressive growth of the businesses two businesses that I had then, because Bitcoin was outperforming all of them. I was never going to be able to outgrow Bitcoin, and that's a realization that needs to happen. So either you're going to realize it now, or you're going to realize it at 500K, or you're going to realize it at a million, or you're just going to, at some point, you're going to realize it. And I don't, it's a simple IQ test at this point. It is a scarce asset, the only scarce asset that humanity has ever seen, true scarcity, that's being chased by unlimited money. If you cannot understand that, you might be thicker than any of us can help. And that's okay. There's a role for you in the world. It's just not my role to help fix that anymore.
Hey guys, this episode is brought to you by OnRamp. Bitcoin custody is evolving. Both self-custody and single third-party custody come with significant risks and trade-offs. OnRamp is pioneering a new standard, multi-institution custody, which eliminates single points of failure, adding fault tolerance and redundancy to your setup. OnRamp secures your Bitcoin in a segregated, cold storage, multi-sig vault, guarded by 3 independent institutional grade custodians, none of which have unilateral control. Multi-institution custody removes the technical, mental, and physical burdens of private key management, providing unparalleled peace of mind for you and your loved ones. To learn more, schedule a consultation with the OnRamp team. Go to www.onrampbitcoin.com. What do you think the most significant barriers to Bitcoin adoption are today? And does that is that different in the UK versus the US or elsewhere? Yeah, how do you think through that?
I don't think there are any barriers anymore. Well, I think all the barriers have been lifted. BlackRock is in the game. As soon as they started getting into the game, I started saying on camera and on video, on interviews, that it's over. The game's won, right? And people didn't believe me for 6 to 8 months until the ETF was approved. Then they didn't believe me because the asset managers weren't selling it. Now asset managers are selling it. Pretty soon we're going to see the top 1% allocated into Bitcoin in the amounts that these asset managers want them to be allocated in, and then it will move down to the high net worths, right? And the high net worths need more promotion than the ultra high net worths. So you'll see more promotion from that perspective. There is absolutely zero barrier to entry. You want to buy spot Bitcoin, you can buy it. You want to buy ETFs, you can buy them. You want to buy MSTR, you can buy them. You want to do options, you can buy it. There is unlimited ways now to get access to Bitcoin exposure, whatever you feel safe with. And if people don't want to do it, it's their fault at this point. Now we are not at a point of lack of education. Arguably, when I came into Bitcoin in 2020, there was an element of lack of education. At this point, that game is done. There is no issues of lack of education anymore. It is about uh, when you will be told to get into it and when you will be allowed to get into it, and whether you are smart enough to beat that timeline or not. That's it. You are getting into Bitcoin. It is over. You will find yourself in Bitcoin. Either you're going to find yourself in Bitcoin through the NASDAQ with MSTR, or you're going to find yourself in Bitcoin through spot markets. You are going to get into Bitcoin. It is simple as that. There is no more I won't be in Bitcoin. You will be in Bitcoin. It's just how.
And I guess that's a important distinction is there are certain segments of retail and institutional that for several reasons cannot access the ETFs, but they are able to access MicroStrategy.
Right.
What does it
The
say?
entire bond market. Let's
Yeah,
start with that.
yeah. What does it say to you that BlackRock came out recently and said in writing an allocation of 1 to 2%, whereas they had just
It's
been
huge.
silent on it previously?
Yeah, it's huge. It basically tells you that this is how they're starting to think about portfolios. The interesting thing is how quickly that's going to evolve. This is what I'm watching. How quickly does that evolve from 1 or 2% to 5%,
Mhm.
right? Because if it doesn't evolve, then we could see ourselves facing a portfolio rebalancing on an annual basis until it does. So if that 2% goes up to 10%, will they sell down 8% to get back to the 2% allocation for the next year? That could cause a downstream in the market, a downflow in the market. Personally, I do not think that's going to happen. And I think that 2% recommendation will evolve as BlackRock starts seeing the fees rolling in for IBIT. I do not think that they want to launch the most successful and profitable product that they've ever launched in the history of BlackRock and then wind it back. I do not think that's going to happen.
That makes sense. Do you have any thoughts on the layer two solutions in relation to scaling Bitcoin?
Scaling Bitcoin in what way? I mean, MSTR is a layer two solution to Bitcoin, right? The options market is a layer two solution to Bitcoin. If you're talking about actually transacting with Bitcoin, that's not something I care about. It's not something I focus on. It's not something I care about. I think that Michael Saylor has laid out the perfect solution here, which is some form of digital US dollar and Bitcoin as a savings technology. And I think that's how we are going to proceed, at least for the foreseeable future. That I think is the best way, the most incentivized way for the US to remain dominant. It is the most incentivized way for the powers that be to cause Bitcoin adoption. And it is the smoothest and fastest way to get Bitcoin as an integral part of the entire financial system. That is going to be the way for the next 25 years. After that, we'll see.
If you had to make a bold prediction for what you think Bitcoin's role is going to be in society 10 or 20 years from now, what would you say?
10 or 20 years from now is tough because I wasn't expecting the president of the United States to start talking about a Bitcoin strategic reserve in 2024, right? I don't think
Mhm.
it was on anyone's bingo card that in 1 year we would have ETFs, we would have senators, we would have, policy, we would have the president of the United States of America talking about a Bitcoin strategic reserve. But I think that's what it becomes. I think it becomes a strategic reserve asset for the world. And that strategic reserve asset has a certain volatility to it. And that volatility then becomes tradable. And then it becomes a combination of like anything else, a speculative strategic reserve asset.
Do you think Bitcoin has the potential to reduce wealth inequality, or will it kind of simply just reinforce the existing disparities that we see?
My opinion on that is that wealth inequality is not as a result of the bad assets that we have had. Wealth inequality is a result of the access to the investments that we've had. And then a layer two on that, per se, is that it is a intelligence question, right? Everyone understands now that governments print money, right? This has suddenly just become some kind of social phenomenon that everyone seems to get. You got TikTokers talking about this, right? Um, and so, can it reduce wealth inequality? Absolutely. If you're smart enough to take your earnings on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, and put a portion of that paycheck into Bitcoin, sure, it can. Just like you were able to with gold, just like you were able to with equities, just like you were able to with real estate. Now we're entering a period where real estate is priced people out. The good thing about Bitcoin is that ain't gonna happen, right? Because you can buy $1,000 worth of Bitcoin. You can't buy $1,000 worth of real estate. That's why the equity market became more important than the real estate market for wealth inequality, because you could just buy $1,000 of stock. You could have stock splits, et cetera, et cetera. You can't do house splits. And Bitcoin is a better version of that. So Bitcoin will become a more important asset than the equities markets. And people have to be smart enough to do it, right? At the end of the day, you have to take some kind of personal responsibility. Bitcoin is not here to save you, right? You are here to save you. And Bitcoin is a tool in order to do that, but you have to be smart enough to actually execute on that. You have to be smart enough to not buy a pair of fucking Jordans, and you have to be smart enough to put that $300 into Bitcoin. If you're smart enough, you will find yourself becoming less unequal. But if you're not smart enough, you will find yourself becoming more unequal.
What's your general outlook for 2025, and maybe in two parts? On one side, Bitcoin, and on the other side, MicroStrategy, insofar as coming out with a new capital plan, probably a larger capital plan to deploy and buy more Bitcoin.
Okay, so let's tackle the Bitcoin one first. I think Bitcoin is going to continue to see buying up. One of the things that's been fascinating is, whenever we see a dip, it's sort of it's like 10%, right? Recently, we've had one that's larger than 10%. But like, I don't see the bear case for an 80% dip again, because it doesn't none of I follow incentives, right? And there's no incentives that line up for me that make me go, okay, so BlackRock has $50 billion in IBIT. If, let's say, Bitcoin 3 or 4 X's from here, right? So you got $250 billion without a single additional penny put into that asset. Why would you want that asset to now be worth $60 billion again for 3 years? It doesn't make sense. And BlackRock has the ability to put a put in the market via MicroStrategy, right? So I think Bitcoin is going to grind up. I think we may not see a parabolic blow off top. And I think we're going to grind up here, because I think that's what makes the most amount of sense. Gold had an 8-year up run every single year after the ETF was announced. It took 8 years for the supply to catch up enough to start dampening the price on gold. Guess what? That can't happen with Bitcoin. The supply can never catch up. So I think we've got a phenomenal decade, 2 decades ahead of us here. And I think there is a chance that we do not see the parabolic blow off tops that everyone's expecting, but rather see a slow grind up over a period of time with a flush out to take some coins, put them on the OTC desk, and then allow the big players to suck those coins up. Saying that, I think MicroStrategy has become an amazing tool for the market to use as twofold. Number one, acquisition of Bitcoin and the securitization of Bitcoin. And number two, to put a put in the market. Because if you're BlackRock, right, all you do is you call your bond desk up and say, right, sell a bunch of MicroStrategy bonds and get some capital to them because we can trust that they are going to buy the underlying asset. If you give MicroStrategy $80 billion, you now guarantee a floor price for a year of $600,000 because they're buying up every single with that 80 billion every single day, right? So if you're IBIT, you can now protect this asset called IBIT. If you're BlackRock, you can protect the asset called IBIT by just getting capital flown into MSTR. And this is that flywheel, the multiple flywheels are working together that we were discussing the last time we had a conversation. So that's what I think is going to happen. I think MicroStrategy is a very effective way to put a put in the market for the price of Bitcoin to protect the downside while allowing the upside to roar. And that's what I think happens here. I think MicroStrategy becomes more and more adopted by Wall Street because it is an enhanced volatility asset on top of Bitcoin. So from that perspective, I think one of the things that Bitcoin is going to have to deal with is that Wall Street's going to like MicroStrategy much more than it's going to like Bitcoin. The good news is, the benefit is that they'll pump up MicroStrategy, and with that, MicroStrategy will turn around and buy Bitcoin, which will support the underlying asset, unlike any other time in human history, by the way.
Has it at all surprised you how much engagement, especially negative MicroStrategy posts, have gotten on social media? I mean, it just seems to be kind of everywhere. And, you know, I don't see it becoming less a part of the conversation over the next, call it 12 months, but it just has kind of surprised me to the upside, whether it's positive or negative, but especially the negative, kind of almost nonsensical comments. You're just getting so much engagement. Is that showing you ignorance in the market or just people enjoying clicking on things that are sensational?
I think there's two sides to this, right? The way I look at it, there's two sides. We'll start with the negative side first, in that, all these people, guys like me come into the space. We've experienced volatility in real estate. We've experienced volatility in the gold market. We've experienced volatility in the equities market. So this is nothing new. We know how to position size. We know how to risk manage. We know how to, yeah, we just know how to do these things and survive through volatile periods. The people that are getting into MicroStrategy now, the comments that you're talking about on Twitter are people who, this is the first time that they're actually exposing themselves to these financial tools like options and things like that in the market. And unfortunately for them, they're doing it with the single most volatile equity that the American capital markets have ever seen. So they're about to be collateral damage because of this, right? And the beautiful thing is, when Saylor has said that, volatility is vitality, that means up and down, right? The volatility is up and down. It doesn't mean it's a single straight line up. And if you don't understand how risk management works, you don't understand how position sizing works, you don't understand how all these things work, you're going to find yourself hung in the middle of that volatility, right? And they don't care. The market makers don't care who is hung, as long as someone is hung, because that creates value in the market. Because if you lose a bunch of money in call options, that creates value to the option market, and that's what you want. You want value to the option market. So volume is very, very important. They're driving volumes, all of these negative feedback. I empathize with them a lot because I don't know what it would be like to come into this, to put a large amount of money for the first time ever in a leveraged instrument on the most leveraged equity that, or the most volatile equity that humanity has ever seen. I empathize for them, but at the end of the day, they're providing value to the market. Whether they get hung in the way, along the way or not, is a different question. But again, it goes back to my message of you get to one Bitcoin first, and then anything else you consider doing, all this fancy shit. True Bitcoiners that are in the MSTR investment definitely have not put all of their Bitcoin into it. They've got Bitcoin in cold storage and they're using a certain percentage of that to put into MSTR for the long term. They're not trying to trade short term options and roll them up and in as the market gets heated up, right? Then they're not doing that.
Hey guys, today's episode is brought to you by Stampseed. If you're in cold storage, you know how important it is to protect your seed phrase. That's why I recommend you head over to stampseed.com and check it out for yourself. This seed phrase storage device is one solid piece of titanium. There are no loose pieces, and you can hammer your seed phrase in letter by letter. When you go to stampseed.com, use promo code TIM15 for a 15% discount across the website. That's TIM15. What is the mainstream media where you are? What is it like in so far as Bitcoin goes? Is it very similar to the US media? Is it different? Is it covered as much? Is it covered more than over here? I would think not. But like, what does that landscape look like for just like the average person in the UK? And are there, I guess separately, are there as many opportunities with exchanges and ETFs to buy over there as in the US, or is that different?
Yeah, so I have two perspectives on this. One is from the UK perspective and one from the UAE perspective. I'm currently not in either of those countries, but those are the ones that I'm keeping up to date with the most. Um, in the UK is a complete shit show when it comes to Bitcoin, right? They've taken every step to try and harm the UK investor to getting access to innovative financial products. We are hemmed still in the UK by the EU MiFID rules, um, and it's an absolute disaster in the UK. I would say the UK is probably 4 to 5 years behind the US from a marketing and perception point of view on Bitcoin, and that is catastrophic when it comes to Bitcoin. It might not be catastrophic when it comes to real estate, but it's catastrophic when it comes to Bitcoin because of the supply dynamics of the asset. So, you know, it's a disaster. I don't know how else to say it. Like the UK is a complete and utter shit show and disaster to the point where I've now got friends that are finally calling me and saying, "Hey, the conversation we had when you were leaving the UK, let's have that conversation now because I think I'm ready to make the move because UK investors are completely locked down on what they can do to protect themselves, their families, and their futures." As far as the UAE goes, very, very positive. The UAE is very positive on anything that's going to, lead us into the future. Um, the UAE is looking to bring more Bitcoin funds, Bitcoin investments, Bitcoin everything to their capital markets. The thing that's holding the UAE back is the banking system. Once the banking system and its regulations catch up with the vision of the government, um, you're going to see the UAE blast off like we've never seen before. So, I mean, there's a lot more coming for the UAE here as long as they stay focused.
Is there anything else that you're keeping your eyes on and really paying attention to as we kick off 2025?
The only thing for me is how can MSTR continue to scale its capital, its capital plans, right? But I think it certainly caught me off guard. I think it also caught Michael Saylor off guard with the 21-21 plan that they came out with, because again, like I said, they were running around looking for scraps, $1 billion here, $800 million there, and now suddenly you announce a $42 billion plan. It's insane. So I'm kind of curious to see how fast this can scale because clearly, the ATMs are a great idea uh, when there is enough volume in the market to sustain those ATM sales. And I think that maybe a $21 billion ATM sale was a bit too much right? Was a bit too much as I've been trying to run through that. Um, and some weeks I've been able to see in the markets like, okay, I think they're pushing an ATM here. This past week I got it completely wrong on how much they would be able to buy, and there was genuine selling pressure for a lot of the last week. So they'll continue to figure that out. But again, this is what makes the stock interesting, right? Saylor has, I'm a nerd for like specific words, right? And especially if someone's got a specific rhetoric and then they give an interview and now they're using new words, it makes
Mm.
me curious. My analytical brain starts wondering, like, why are they using new words all of a sudden? And what are they thinking about in their daily life that is now seeping these unconscious words out to the public? Maybe it's conscious, maybe it's unconscious, but why are they using these new words all of a sudden, right? And Sailor, this is the first time I've spoken about this actually. So yeah, I would say probably about 3 weeks ago, maybe 4 weeks ago. He was on a podcast and he started using the word interesting. Like, and that really caught me off guard, right? Because it's like, what do you mean by interesting? Like, how does interesting relate to MicroStrategy? And he kept using it over and over again. And I started digging into it. And what I've come to analyze for myself, again, I don't have any proprietary or insider information, but just from my understanding, what their objective is to keep MicroStrategy interesting for the markets. And how do you keep a stock interesting for the markets? So then you start working down that path, right? And how you keep a stock interesting for the markets is you have it go up in a very quick fashion, and then you have it go down in a very quick fashion, right? Because if it goes up for too long, it gets boring. If it goes down for too long, it gets boring. So I think that what they've figured out is we need to use our capital structures to keep MicroStrategy interesting. And how do you do that? You dump a bunch of ATM into the market, crash the stock price to acquire all that Bitcoin along the way. Then you lift off the ATMs, and then you let the premium expand, and then you keep it interesting in both directions. That allows the bondholders to generate gamma returns on the back end of their bonds that they're generating. It also allows the news media to keep it interesting because now MSTR is in front of you every single time, because it goes up, it's in front of you, it goes down, it's in front of you. Because I guarantee you, all those CNBC guys, it's going up to $500, they want to talk to him. It crashes to 250, they want to talk to him. So they figured out the way to use financial engineering to keep the stock interesting is one thing. The second thing is he then started talking very much about ATMs, right? It was a sudden, like, all of a sudden he was explaining about ATMs to everyone. And I started thinking about it, like, why would you do that? Why would you spend so much time explaining the ATM when your goal is to keep the stock interesting? Because eventually what's happening right now in the space is he's using the ATM so much that the stock's becoming boring. That's why people are hating it so much. Well, guess what he's about to do? He's about to stop using the ATM all of a sudden. So now he's keeping your dopamine receptors keeping your dopamine receptors fresh, because just when you think that you've figured out the MicroStrategy strategy, he's going to change it.
Mm.
And we're going to go into doing a period of convertible bonds, right? And so this is what I'm intrigued about. Bitcoin is Bitcoin. Bitcoin's going to work. It's going to continue adoption. It's going to continue everything else. And as the price goes up, more people get interested, et cetera, et cetera. But MSTR is very unique because it is an equity that can stay interesting by utilizing the financial engineering that they've got in order to keep it front and center of mind. And then, of course, I want to see what happens once we can start mapping out earnings. Because one of the things that people don't understand, people say, wait, so if everyone knows that they can adjust these FASB rules, why is no one front running this? Clearly, it has to be front run because there's hedge funds out there that can see this and that can map it out, and et cetera, and they can start buying now. The thing that people don't realize, and I don't blame them because they don't have experience, is that in order for a big hedge fund to actually place a trade like that, they actually have to provide research to their investors, to the SEC, that supports every trade. And if it's not applicable in the law, they cannot put it in the research. So they can't front run it because they don't have, they might be able to front run it in small numbers, but they can't front run it in terms of like, okay, we can put a sizable position into this investment, because they cannot provide the research to support it, because the law doesn't allow the landscape for that research to be applicable right now. In February, that changes because that's their first earnings. So I'm kind of curious to see how, when we shift from this percent, because MNAV is a stupid way to look at it. It's the way that I was looking at it. Future earnings is fascinating. So the question is, you got, let's just say they get to 500,000 Bitcoin by February. Well, what is the future earning power of that 500,000 Bitcoin? Now I can start modeling that as a hedge fund owner, and now I can start pricing the equity based on future earnings, which is how equities are priced. So all of that's going to come down the pipeline. I'm very intrigued to see how that turns out. But that's really all I'm looking at. Like I said, this is the hardest. Bitcoin Tina years ago said this is the hardest trade, because it's just going to bore you to $1 million. So if you're not interested in all these other things like MSTR and everything else that's going on, you're going to be bored for a while, because I think we're going to have a grind up over here. I do not. I'm less and less confident in a blow off top scenario.
How would you think through and evaluate other Bitcoin equities like a Semler Scientific or a Rumble, where maybe they have a lower market cap, and a varying degree of Bitcoin on their balance sheet? Probably not what most would consider like a levered long strategy like MicroStrategy, but different. And I've just heard several people kind of jumping on the train of, well, anybody, any firm that's putting Bitcoin on their balance sheet, I'm interested in that. And maybe there's two separate camps of like wanting to support a firm, a company, a public equity that supports Bitcoin, but then in a different bucket, like actually analyzing it from a returns perspective.
Yeah, I think all these companies are going to add value, right? At the end of the day, Bitcoin is a growth engine, right? That was the one key thing that helped me get over my sticking points with MSTR. Bitcoin is a growth engine. You can take any company now, and whatever let's say you're growing at 12% a year, you can add Bitcoin into it and now start growing at 17% a year, which attracts more capital to you. So all of these companies are doing a good job adding Bitcoin to their balance sheet. The question is, you know, what value does that bring to the debt markets and the fixed income markets that are hungry for volatility? Because the equity markets are fine, right? I'm actually talking with an ETF provider right now because they're thinking about launching an ETF in this environment. But that will come out whenever it comes out. But so that part's taken care of. Everyone knows how to work that. But the fixed income markets are quite interesting, right? Because what if you could create a portfolio of Bitcoin convertible bonds where you've got MSTR with the highest, highest octane jet fuel of Bitcoin. Then you've got HUT, for example, who also has a mining business attached to it. So it's less volatile than MSTR, but it also has Bitcoin on the balance sheet. Then you got Semler Scientific. Then you got all these other companies that are coming in, and they all add to the diversified portfolio of volatility that you want to buy if you're a bond trader, right? So all of that becomes very, very interesting as we go along. And again, I use the word interesting for a reason, because that's what you want. You want this market to be interesting for capital. And when the market is interesting for capital will come to it. And that's what Saylor understands. And that's what he's orchestrating with MicroStrategy at this moment in time. He is making it interesting. So all these other companies better be interesting, not just with returns, with marketing strategy, with capital allocation plans, et cetera, et cetera. How do you use all these tools to be interesting?
What's your view on stablecoins? Recently, Samson Mao had a post and he hit on Bitcoin, he hit on MicroStrategy, and he hit on Tether. Um, Like, do you think they all kind of work together and they're all vitally important, or how do you think through the stablecoin piece of the market?
Yeah, I think stablecoins are a vital part of the future that we are creating. They allow the US dollar to be sent all over the world instantly. You can actually circumvent governmental powers, right? Because if I can just give access to the people, the US dollar stablecoin, and then a government starts causing problems, we could just pivot your populace onto the US dollar without having to deal with any of the government side of it. So the US is really going to lean into stable coins, in my opinion, in this next administration. I think they're essential and very, very powerful. I would like it if they were run on top of some kind of Bitcoin chain. And I'm not technically advanced enough to talk about that, but I would like that to be the case. But I think stable coins are the future of the United States at this point.
Anything else that you want to cover today? And otherwise, where can people find you, and any closing thoughts that you might have?
No, the only there's nothing else to cover really. I mean, look, everything's already happening. Like I said, I've been saying this for months, right? The biggest the biggest news in Bitcoin was BlackRock stepping into the game. In that 1 year, we have seen senators fall, we have seen senators rise, we have seen a political party that everyone thought was going to lose come out with a landslide. We have seen countries talk about, I think there's more than 15 countries already talking about a strategic national reserve with Bitcoin. You think all of this just happened? You think all of this just magically happened after BlackRock got in the game? These guys are here to absolutely dominate the market. That's how they think. And they will succeed because BlackRock is, you know, an animal in the space. And they've realized that they can utilize Bitcoin to generate the growth and the returns that the world needs to see at this point to lift us out of the amount of money printing that we've done. So guess what? We can continue printing more money. And Bitcoin will provide that foundation, at least for the next, 25 to 50 years. So if you're sitting there going, hey, do I get an allocation in this? I don't give a shit anymore because you will be forced to get an allocation one way or another. Either it's going to be through the Nasdaq, it's going to be through the S&P 500 eventually, or it's going to be through spot, or there's going to be some kind of Bitcoin backed financial services that you're interested in. It's coming for you. Either you're going to be ahead of that or you're going to be forced into it at some point. It's your choice. But at this point, we're about, right now we're not, but we're basically above $100,000. And I tell you what, I started buying Bitcoin at $5,000. So it took 20x to get here. And it's only a 10x to a million. And the asset is probably 20 times more de-risked than when I started buying. Think about that for a second. So 20x to get here from when I started buying. The asset is 20 times less risky than when I started buying. And it's only a 10x to get to a million. It's the perfect setup.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for your time, and thanks for joining us today.
You're very welcome. Proud of you guys for what you're doing, and thanks for having me.